Hello staff, hello students, welcome back to Chef Mel's Kitchen. So the recipe I'm making today is inspired by VE Day. Now VE Day, which is Victory for Europe Day, is on the 8th of May and it symbolises when the war finished, when the Second World War finished. And in honour of that, I'm making a wartime recipe that was incredibly popular back then, that they probably would have made in celebration for that day. I'm making something called Homity Pie. Some of you may not have heard of that before. It's gone in and out of fashion since the war. The Homity Pie was developed by these women called the land girls. Now the land girls were women who, when all the soldiers were out to war, the women would be at home and they'd be either going into the fields and growing fruit and veg for the troops, or the land girls would be going around and encouraging people in their homes, in their own garden, to grow their own fruit and veg. And there are a number of recipes around that wartime that would encourage you to use your rations, because you had something called rationing back then, which meant you only had a certain small amount of ingredients to use every week. So you had your rations, and then you had anything you could grow in your garden. And so the land girls created this Homity Pie idea to use what you could get from your rations from the shops and what you could grow from your garden. So I'm going to be making that today. So as you can see, a really simple array of ingredients today, and I'll just go through these quickly. You'll be making your own pastry. So you'll need 400 grams of plain flour. The usual wartime recipe had 200 grams plain flour and 200 grams wholemeal, but I couldn't get it in the shops. So that's 400 grams of plain flour, 200 grams of butter, so half butter to flour, and 1 egg. And a bit of salt, and you might need a bit of water to bind it, but that's for the pastry. And for the filling, you'll need an onion, 2 leeks, 500 grams of leeks, and 2 baking potatoes, which is 600 grams. And again, the land girls recipe, that would be encouraged to get your onions and leeks and potatoes from your garden. I've also got a handful of fresh parsley, which is actually from my own garden that I've grown myself, so I think the land girls would be proud of me. I think it's 150 millilitres of double cream, and you'll need 170 grams of grated cheddar, which in the olden days would be 5 ounces. Interesting little fact about eggs: in rationing times you would only get 1 egg per week per person in the household, so a family of 4 would only get 4 eggs per week to go with. So those are all the ingredients you'll need. And you'll also need a flan tin or a pie tin, ideally with a loose bottom, if you can see that. I've got a fancy one with wriggly edges, but you can just have a... So first you need to make your pastry. Put your 400 grams of flour in a mixing bowl, add a generous pinch of salt, and add your 200 grams of butter or margarine or lard. What they would have used, and you're going to rub that with your fingers into a fine crumb. Once you've incorporated the fat into the flour, crack 1 egg in, and then bring that together to form a dough. If it's a little bit dry, add a splash of water, but make sure you don't add too much water, otherwise instead of pastry you end up with a sticky mess. You should now have a nice ball of pastry. You can put that in the fridge to rest whilst you make the filling. So I've got a large pan of salted water on the boil here, and I've diced my 600 grams of potatoes into about 1.5 centimetre cubes. Most recipes say to peel the potatoes, but I'm going to keep the skin on because less waste, and also most of the nutrition is underneath the skin, so that's going to go in. Ooh. And that's going to be blanched for 5 minutes, which means partially cooked, and then I'll drain that. So I've drained my potatoes there, and back in the saucepan I've put 2 tablespoons of oil, or you could use a knob of butter, 1 white onion finely sliced, and 2 leeks, 500 grams finely sliced. And I'm going to sweat that down with a bit of salt and pepper for 10 minutes. I know it looks like there's a lot there, but as it cooks it's going to shrink down. So that will be sweated for 10 minutes. Now add your blanched potato, your 150 ml of double cream. Oh, lovely. Yum, 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 yum. and 2 tablespoons of freshly chopped parsley that I've grown myself. You don't have to grow it yourself. There you go. That's just me showing off. And that just needs to cook for 1 or 2 minutes just for you to stir it through, just to make sure that everything's really nicely combined. Double check that you're happy with the seasoning. That's perfect, bearing in mind that there will be cheese going on that as well, and cheese is salty. Preheat your oven to 180 degrees and grease your pie tin around the sides and on the base, and that will stop the pie from sticking. And then you can roll out your pastry whilst your filling is cooling down a little bit. I forgot to say, as well as your 400 grams of flour you need for your pastry, you'll also need just a little bit just to roll your pastry out, a couple of tablespoons. So flour your surface, you get your rested pastry, and then flour. Try not to put too much flour though, because then it dries the pastry out. And then, but a little trick is putting a bit of flour on the rolling pin, as so, and then it stops the rolling pin from sticking to the pastry. Roll that out nice and thinly. Roll that out. You need roughly about this thickness. I'm just going to carefully transfer that onto the dish. I need 2 hands for that. Once you've got your pastry into the case, push it round onto the sides, and then you're going to trim it at the edges with a small knife. With a fork, prick the base, so not all the way through, but prick the base with a fork, and that's going to help the pastry cook evenly and stop it from rising too much in the middle. Now you can put your filling in. So I'll just show you a bit. So start scooping your filling in. It might still be hot, as you can see, but don't worry about that. Put all of your filling in and really mound that up. And once you've added all the filling in, smooth it over. So now you just need to top with your cheese. So I've just finely grated this. You can grate it a bit thicker, but yeah, and just loads of lovely grated cheese. Looks like a lot of cheese, but when you think about it, there's no meat in this recipe, so really the luxurious part of the recipe is the cheese, really. Although saying that, I reckon you could get away with using 4 ounces of cheddar rather than 5, but there you go. So really generously and evenly top that with your grated cheese. And then, I don't know, I'm messy. And then that's going to go in the oven, in the center of the oven, 180 degrees fan for 50, that's 50 minutes. How amazing and delicious does that look? I'm just going to let that cool for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to take that out of its tin. I might need to use a knife to get it out from the edges, but yeah. And there we go, Homity Pie in honour of VE Day.